Great, very good. Well, my name is Mark Toner, and I'm the acting deputy spokesman here at the State Department. I'm very old school media. I'm one of the poor schmucks who has to get up at the podium and explain U.S. foreign policy and take questions from journalists sitting in a room, which, as I said, is very old school, but still gets the message out. But I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to our next topic, and it's why I'm deeply appreciative that I've got these three experts with me to discuss open communications and the changing media landscape. It's almost ironic that we're sitting here while across the ocean in Cairo and across Egypt, tremendous change is happening, and it's all caught up in this changing media landscape with Twitter, Facebook, and some of the other new technologies that are brought to bear to create some of these social movements that we're seeing and giving a voice to people's aspirations around the world. But we at the State Department, like many institutions, are grappling to understand this new technology and to learn or appreciate, I think, how technology and policy making is becoming more and more connected. And so we're, in a sense, here today in listening mode and trying to get a better grasp of I think that's better. Trying to get a better grasp of the issues at stake, frankly. But I'm very happy to be joined here today by three, I'll call you experts in the field. First of all is Saad Khan, who's a seed investor in CMEA Capital. Katherine Maher, who's the ICT. What's ICT stand for? It's the
Information and Communication Technology.
Thank you. Thanks, Katherine. Officer at the National Democratic Institute. And then Habib Haddad, who's the founder of YallaStartup and Yamli and a co-creator of Alive in Egypt, which he was just explaining to me, is a crowd sourcing Twitter kind of feed. Okay. Yeah, see, I'm getting. Anyway, this is very informal, and the more informal the better, and the more open the better, I guess, in keeping with the theme. I'm just going to offer our panelists here the chance to say a few words, kick around some ideas, and then I can ask questions, and we certainly want you to ask the lion's share of questions. I don't know if you want to say a few words at the top, or?
Sure. So I'm Saad Khan. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think it kind of feels like we're in the middle of something really big happening all around us, and the fact that we're all here at the State Department having a discussion about this topic on this day is just it's kind of surreal, actually. So I feel like there should be a fourth and a fifth panelist, one of which is like a CNN screen, an Al Jazeera screen, and maybe a Twitter feed somewhere over here, so we can all kind of keep in touch with what's going on.
We're remarkably out of touch for open media communications.
So I was a little bit humbled last night when I got in because the topic was about technology, and as a technology investor, I'm supposed to know something about technology. And I get into my cab on my way back from IAD to DC, and my cab driver turns out to be an Ethiopian, and he says, "Is it okay if I turn something on?" And I said, "Well, he's Ethiopian. He probably wants to listen to the radio about Egypt." And he gets his Android phone out, and it's got a live feed of CNBC and actually also of Fox News, and he has Velcro on the back of it. He puts it in the back of the cab and says, "Let's all watch together." So, I guess that says something about the world that we're in. By the way, his battery ran out later on, and he started getting texts in, so it was kind of a funny sort of analysis of this whole world that we're living in. My background, just so you guys have some context, I'm a seed investor at CMEA Capital. I'm based in San Francisco. I'm kind of in the business of making really, really early stage startups work, and certainly from a financing perspective. I've been doing this for about 10 years. Was at another firm called Garage.com earlier, which I think was the first startup incubator in Silicon Valley. I'm really passionate about some of the topics from a for-profit perspective that we're going to be talking about here today. Crowdsourcing is certainly one of them. So I'm just happy to be here, and frankly, I want to hear as much from you guys as I do from our panelists here, so I'm going to shut up and let them talk.
Thanks. So, my name is Habib Haddad. I'm a tech entrepreneur focused mostly on Arabic language, the Middle East, and all of that good stuff. So I think I'm just going to give a few examples of what I saw happened in Egypt from a technology standpoint. So the Facebook group that was launched and that got all this event happening, I was fortunate enough to be a good friend of the person who started, and I was really following the news from back in June when actually it was initiated. And it's funny because Katherine and I were talking about that yesterday. We're like kind of digest what happened. Essentially, so the first thing that happened, some of you might know that Khaled Said, he's a normal Egyptian, has been tortured by the police for supposedly having videos about police torture, and from then on, it caused a lot of emotions on the web. On that day, a few days after actually, a few people, Egyptians and other than the non-Egyptians actually as well, decided to kind of add in and voice their concerns and decided to open a Facebook group. Now what's interesting about that and how they use technology from then on was really amazing. So the first thing they did is they called the Facebook group, "We Are All Khaled Said," and they put his picture. And all of the messaging from Facebook to the users was mostly from from someone who's dead, an innocent basically, who's been dead from beyond, sending messages about purely emotional messages, poems, videos. It's amazing. Each time they share a link on the Facebook status, it gets reshared about 60,000 times on other people's Facebook pages. And that's without actually the number of page views they have on YouTube. So the amount of reach they had was amazing. The messaging was always really good. So one of the things they did was for example, come up with a campaign saying, take a picture of yourself with a black T-shirt and put it online so that you can share it with all of us. And people started taking pictures, being all creative, and that also caught on and got even more people engaged in it. So all of that time, really the message was not about politics, was not about anything else that even gets close to politics, was mostly about emotion, was mostly about human rights. And that, I think, resonates really well with a lot of Egyptians, and they see themselves very much aligned with those goals. Other interesting points that also, for example, happened on the Facebook group is they also had sometimes, one of the interesting things actually they came up with was demonstration, but because the laws don't allow gathering of more than 5 people in one place, they had the brilliant idea of getting people stand on the seaport and wearing black T-shirts. They back to Egypt because to indicate that they're not happy with what's happening, and they're looking at the sea. And all of that happened on Facebook from a guy who's sitting in Dubai, a geek who's sitting in Dubai, who's been doing all of that from his own living room after hours. And the day he would be working at Google. So there was him and a few others that actually really involved with that. But just to look at how they were really sending out the messages and also filtering through and asking people to create videos, mash up videos and put it on YouTube was all amazing. I think I'm going to just stop for a minute because I just remember that Katherine has to leave, so I'm conducted.
Hi, thanks, Habib. My name is Katherine Maher. I'm an ICT Programs Officer at the National Democratic Institute. I am not an entrepreneur. Instead, I work with people who have really great ideas and try to make sure that they become a reality. I think that the fact that we're talking about the Middle East today as sort of a dominating theme is really interesting. I haven't actually worked on any programs in my capacity at NDI that have had to do with Tunisia or Egypt, but I've been following them really closely just out of personal interest. I spent some time living in Egypt a while back. I know the region fairly well and worked on a couple projects using technology and open source technology in the region, looking at sort of news gathering, news sharing a few years back. And to see sort of the leaps and bounds that have been accomplished over the past couple of years, to see this technology having such an incredible transformative aspect has just been something that I don't think, I'd like to say that I couldn't have anticipated it, but the reality is that people like Habib, who've actually been watching from the ground, who've been participating, could have anticipated it. And we were talking last night about how, had we all sort of been paying a little bit closer attention, we really might have been able to see what was coming towards us. And I'm very excited by looking at sort of what these models are, to think about how we might sort of capture some of this data and think about how we can anticipate some of these things going forward. I made the observation in conversation with friends the other day that this may in fact be the best documented, best sort of this may be in fact be the best documented political event to have ever occurred, right? Not only do we have sort of the data and the documentation that people are taking on the ground, but we have all the metadata that's also around these conversations. You know, when you talk about the fact that people are communicating remotely, they're coordinating and they're discussing, you've got the chat logs, you've got the times, you've got the dates, you've got the locations associated with all of these things, and then you have the actual content that people are creating. It came out I think when we were in the earlier session that there's some indications that the video of President Mubarak speaking yesterday evening had actually been pre-recorded. And the assumption, of course, is that that had been determined based on metadata. So you have a whole sort of other layer of information that is now available to us that can help us understand these things better and then hopefully look to create models of how sort of change will occur in the future. So.
I think also to build on what Katherine just said, there's also a whole movement in news to kind of be open, and that's also helping gather even more data. You know, specifically with Al Jazeera being going open about their own footage with Creative Commons, that has been able to push the news out for people to use it, but also for them to get back out of metadata as well around that. I think that's one of the most brilliant techniques that I've seen being used in this particular context. And I think we're going to see them moving more in that direction. I think they start with the Gaza war, and that's what their first test, and now they're doing it more again. But in general, what I've noticed is that social media kind of lowered the cost of revolution, and it allowed the geek in his own bedroom to decide to do something, and he was able to do something about it. I was in shock for the past 2 hours trying to remember like all the discussion that went with a good friend that he decided to just open a Facebook group because he cried when he saw the videos of Khaled Said being tortured. So again, I think we, as Katherine said, we could have anticipated that. We as the group, the Facebook group did call for that. There's not just one, there's many Facebook groups that are around that were calling for that. And it's interesting to see also the language, the use of the language. Yesterday we were looking at the charts of Twitter and in Egypt, and some indication pointed that now Twitter is becoming more mainstream because of Arabic language being used much more on Twitter. And that happened only in the past few days. Only the past week, actually. Twitter in Arabic was really not that well used in Egypt, but now is much more used. I think what that indicates is that moving forward, we're going to see even more. I mean, the early adopters, the geeks in the Middle East, the youth basically, today are the new leaders. And moving forward, because it's moving to the masses, we might see even a different kind of transformation moving. And I'm very interested to see how that's going to happen. But the other point is the way that we're using technology, Facebook to start the group to get people there, sticky factor, and posting a lot of messages, getting people to comment, to post videos, and crowdsourcing a lot of work like videos and music. And then, and actually, a funny thing, we're using a lot of melodrama music. We're talking about that as well, how Egyptians like a lot of melodrama. But they were really being very close to the culture of what Egyptians are used to seeing on the TV and basically soap operas. But then the second part is YouTube was used to raise awareness, to create nice videos, to create nice music around that. And that was also all grassroots, by the way. The people on the Facebook groups were just kind of the microphone kind of guiding people where to go. And then this third part, which is Twitter, which actually happened in real time, which helped on the ground. And going to Twitter, and I'm jumping through Alive in Egypt. So when the internet was blocked in Egypt, there was a team from Google and Twitter that decided to do something that coincidentally happened with Egypt. I'm not sure if they were political about it, but basically was allowing people to call in from their phone numbers and leave a voicemail. Without using the internet, that voicemail would be recorded, then pushed on Twitter through an account called Speak to Tweet, and everyone can hear it. Now, as soon as that actually came up, I went there, started listening to the tweets and to the audio tweets, and they're all in Arabic, obviously because they're coming from Egypt. So at that point, I happened to know the guys from Twitter and Google working on it, and I send a tweet out, and I say, hey, we should translate those because that defeats the purpose of getting the voice out. And all of a sudden, I got like thousands of people tweeting me back. And this is how I got connected to some very smart group of folks from Small World News that actually, pitched in directly and helped set up the site. We also had like a spreadsheet doc, a Google Doc, very ad hoc, not even tech savvy Google Doc, We got folks from Idan who are experts in cross-region transition to get their folks in. And we had 1,000 translators on the first day coming in and using a spreadsheet that had rules there, ad hoc rules saying, if you were, this is an audio tweet link. If you're working on it, mark it locked. Then transcribe it to Arabic. But before you transcribe it, after you transcribe it to Arabic, someone else has to come and double check it. It's kind of also like accountability and put your Twitter handle there. And then once it's done, we will go and post it. And we got really amazing audio coming in. Like one time we got an audio coming in from when the clashes were happening. A woman called in screaming, saying, thugs are killing us, they are following us, etc. That was like a really powerful message that actually was covered by a lot of the press. And again, here we released all of this information on the Creative Commons. So we are linked, we got exposure, and those audios got exposure from news like ABC, Fox News, New York Times, etc., etc. All of those guys just like linked to them because basically we went in an open mentality, which goes back to the whole point. An open mentality, just let everyone innovate on your behalf.
So I actually have another example. I think speaks to both what Katherine and Habib here were saying. One of the things that's been really fun to watch, just separate from the Egypt stuff as well, is just how fast technology moves today and how the bar for getting involved is so much lowered. So I'll give you an anecdote. And I brought a picture of something that I wanted to show. I don't know if someone's got a slide, but let me give you some context. So earlier this week, I got a call from a buddy of mine who's actually a visualization designer. And so he told me, he's like, this Egypt stuff has really woken me up, and I want to take a look at how I can get involved in a more meaningful way. And I said, well, it's funny because this is top of mind for me too. I'm actually going to be at the State Department on Friday. So he started working on actually mining all the Twitter data about all the people who were involved tweeting about Egypt and put together a visualization, which is now behind me, that effectively is the social graph of all people who were tweeting about Egypt. Now, you can't see it here because it's really, really small, but essentially what you have here is a network of all the people who are connected talking about Egypt. The size of every node, the circles, is actually how influential they are with regards to propagating that information. Wael Ghanim is actually there too. I'm sure some of your friends are probably in there. I'm sure you're probably in there in a big way. What's amazing about this, by the way, is that this was actually put together in less than 2 days. The only reason we haven't released it sort of to a more public audience is because we were a little bit worried that, does this essentially help single out people that we don't otherwise want to have bullseyes around them? But it's an example, I think, of what you can do with sort of very short time periods, and in light of all the open data that we were just talking about. I mean, this stuff is all out there in the public. We can actually visualize this to see how the movement started, who the sort of influential people were that started the movement, and as it's gone on, who's come in. We can actually geolocate people too, so you'll notice the actual nodes are color-coded. So there's sort of, the blue ones are English speakers, the red ones are Arabic speakers. We actually also know where they were tweeting from. So we have a sense of sort of when the Egyptians started talking about things versus when the journalists came into it versus when those journalists might have actually gone into Egypt. All this is essentially open source and just from a Twitter feed. So I think it kind of speaks to the power and how quickly things can happen, when creative people get to work.
That is a fascinating graphic. We want to open this up. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in with a question or a comment. No? Anyone yet?
No.
Go.
There's been a lot of talk about, Malcolm Gladwell had an article, the revolution will not be tweeted. Evgeny Morozov is sort of saying that this, the negative side. And then on the other side, I think you have maybe almost too much press given to the social media. And I was sort of wondering if you guys can address sort of this merging of the virtual with the real, meaning you clearly need to have, something in a country that's real. But then I think the comment you made earlier about how does the social media actually impact social change through this open communications? I mean, what's the right way of tying real world on the ground actions with the virtual?
Well, I actually want to send this one to Katherine because I think she has a good perspective on it. But I mean, I was thinking about this in the context of, when we talk about the right to assemble, what does a virtual assembly look like in the context of this new world, right? Because that's what we're talking about here.
So sure, I'm happy to take that a little bit. I think that one of the things that was really interesting, they talked a lot about how the revolution, right, so there's this Malcolm Gladwell article, sort of the revolution will not be tweeted, but in fact, one of the things that I saw that I thought was really fascinating was actually Twitter put together a case study on how Al Jazeera used Twitter to not only promote its information, and so people may or may not be aware, Al Jazeera English is not available in the United States outside of Washington, D.C. in two very small networks, or I guess satellite feeds, in Ohio and Vermont, which means that the vast majority of Americans have absolutely no access to on-the-ground feeds for the first part of what was actually happening in Egypt. Yes, CNN and a variety of other channels, BBC, eventually did catch up, and a lot of our sort of domestic American networks sent people in, but really the best content, and I think that all the people in this room who are sitting there watching it every day would say that they were watching it on Al Jazeera. And where were they watching it? They were watching it on a live stream. In fact, the traffic from on the live stream, I think, from the United States increased by 2,500% in the first week that events started to occur. And I was talking to some of the guys at Al Jazeera, and they were like, you have no idea how much trouble we are having trying to get our servers up to speed. Like, this is insane. We keep going down. We can't expand fast enough. But the point is, this information was going out online, and what Al Jazeera was doing was they had bought sort of these sort of sponsored tweets, and so when anybody looked for certain keywords, they'd get the tweet that Al Jazeera has sponsored, and they make the tweets sticky, which means that they sort of rise to the top, and it's the first thing you see when you search. And so they were able to drive traffic to their site so that people could actually watch what was going on. So it wasn't just that the revolution was televised, because in fact it was, but it was also being tweeted. One of the things that I think is really interesting too, and we were talking about this, is sort of this virtuous cycle. So people would document what was going on the ground with YouTube, but again, these open sort of platforms of communication. They'd put it on YouTube, they'd talk about it on Twitter, and then Al Jazeera's media team, which is actually quite large, would go and they'd spend hours and hours and hours on these sites, scraping and identifying and looking for stuff that was trending, and then they broadcast it back on TV, and they would say, we're not really sure, we can't verify, we don't have our reporters on the ground, but this seems to be real, this seems to be something, this is something that people are talking about, this seems to have firsthand accounts or witnesses, and it's sort of a trending topic. So it became sort of this incredible sort of multi-textual layer of information around sort of traditional reports that I thought was really fascinating. And of course, the more of this sort of user-generated content that got out there on this channel, the more people actually created it and submitted it and would start tweeting at Al Jazeera and being like, listen, we've got this content. And that doesn't actually even begin to account for Facebook, which, as he pointed out, Twitter is actually not used by so many people. It really is sort of the leading early edge adopters. Facebook has a far greater user base in the region, in Egypt specifically, so that just sort of accounts for that. But the last sort of thought I'll leave you with on that is that I was fascinated by looking at a lot of these shots when they were going sort of live to the newsroom in Qatar, and they would have pictures of the reporter, and he wouldn't be sitting in, out in the middle of Tahrir Square. He'd be sitting in front of a Twitter feed and a Facebook page. And that was his source. It's just a completely new sort of model for news that I think is really fascinating. So yeah, the revolution was televised, the revolution was tweeted. Probably not by us here in the United States, despite all of our frantic retweets. I know I was one of them. Really by sort of the people on the ground.
Which raises the question that I have, which is, and we talked a little bit about it prior to this, is, what happens, or how do you square the circle with the journalistic need to get factual information when you've got tweets that, might not be?
The issue of credibility and reputation.
Precisely.
I'm unfortunately going to have, I'm so sorry, I have to step away into a meeting at the very last minute. I apologize, but I'm sure that our two entrepreneurs here probably have a business case that they'd like to talk about in terms of credibility and reputation. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And if you want to ask me a question, I am on Twitter.
Thanks, Katherine.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I could back to the question about Malcolm Gladwell, and then I get it.
Sure.
I think my honest view is Gladwell has lost touch with reality, and he doesn't know anything about the Middle East and doesn't know anything about what's happening on the ground. One thing is important is that it's illegal to do gatherings. It's very costly to go in a coffee shop. It's very costly to go up and sit down with 600,000 people and get their opinions and polls. It's very hard to do any of that. It's very expensive. You could be tortured before you even get to that point. With Facebook, it was done very easily. So even from a practical standpoint, it has helped. And then it has helped ignite the demonstration and the revolution. It also has helped maintain it. But it obviously, at some point in time, even when everything went offline, it continued on growing. So it was the igniter. but also it was used throughout in very important points. For example, a lot of people went missing. And when people went missing, I remember like when Wael went missing, remember his wife calling me, it was Sunday morning, and she was panicking. And at some point in time, I'm not sure how it happened, it leaked to someone on Twitter, and that someone on Twitter started tweeting it, and everyone started retweeting it. And all of a sudden it became on the press, and then became on the press, they put like lots of pressure. And that changed, in my opinion, from a simple tweet of saying he's missing, where is he, to what we are today. I think that changed a lot. It gave a new blood when he came back. People just like started associating with himself more. So again, Twitter here was very important in that. And also very important in getting the message out, but also on the ground, people have been using it to ask for support, and there was even like a Google spreadsheet doc putting down the list of all the or supposedly detained bloggers, and when they were last seen, their pictures, asking demonstrators to go and look for them. So there was also that kind of communication happening. So I think in general it has helped a lot, and much more in Egypt than in Tunis. In Tunis, it has happened throughout a bit. And what's interesting, an example in Tunis, one of the bloggers / Twitter, he's also a tech entrepreneur, he was actually a big, vocal about that. At some point, he went disappearing, but he was using Google Latitude, which is basically a way to tell everyone else where you are on your phone. They can see it on your map. And his friends saw that his last place was at the Ministry of Interior in Tunis. And they knew that he was detained. And then that got, again, covered by everyone. Everyone's talking about it. And that put pressure back on him in release. And now he's actually the Minister of Youth and Sports in Tunis. So I'm not sure where Gladwell is missing the point, but I'm sure he's missing on a lot.
I think the moral of that story is, Foursquare or Twitter, check in wherever you are, because you never know what might happen.
It's helpful with teenagers as well.
I'm at the State Department right now. I read the same article too, and it was an interesting debate. And I think Clay Shirky was sort of the other side of that argument. And I think Malcolm Gladwell's point there was something like, hey, it's not virtual action that matters, it's sort of real action on the ground. And if you look at the civil rights movement, it was real sacrifice by real people who actually were marching that made a difference. So I generally agree with that. I think what I'm hearing from Habib, and what I agree with as well, is this just accelerates that cycle so much. It also, it's certainly on the ground, but it also allows everyone in this room and everyone at this conference to be so engaged with what's going on, because we feel like we have a personal connection with Wael when he was missing. I mean, I think he now has like 60,000 followers on Twitter who are directly waiting to hear from him. That's brand new, right? I mean, that's not coming mediated through CNN. That's something that we have a relationship with this person, whether it's real or not. At least we feel it. And I think there's something very special about it. And that's probably why there's so many people in the U.S. and outside of Egypt who are so engaged in what's going on. I think it's a level of accessibility that just never has existed before. So I think it's absolutely transformative, and something that's going to be a tool set that's going to be a part of things like this in the future.
And as you said, it certainly adds to the immediacy of the situation. Absolutely.
And going back to your question about credibility, I think that's also interesting, because I've seen rumors being spread on Twitter and very quickly catching TV and very quickly becoming like the truth, where it's not true. For example, the news about President Mubarak stepping down that also got covered by Al Jazeera and Arabiya and a lot of others saying he is stepping down, and he was not. Actually, it's funny because everyone was tweeting something called "Reason Mubarak is late," like a hashtag with a lot of jokes. He had like a heavy Egyptian lunch or whatever. It's like stuff like that. He's like he's dyeing his hair or something like that. But it was also kind of got some. I mean, it's known, like Egyptian humor is known in the region, so it kind of also got people a bit more, less anxious. But the other thing is also, one thing I saw is on the day when Wael was supposedly to be released, someone tweeted, said, "Oh yeah, I see him. He's in the crowd. He's in Tahrir Square," and then. And that got a domino effect. It went on Al Jazeera and Arabiya, and actually was not him, because I was like talking with his wife and with the brother at the same time. They were like, no, it's not him. They were panicking. It was actually some goalkeeper who was being held because he's famous, and everyone started chanting, and someone thought it was Wael and tweeted that, and even she did not have that many followers, but people started retweeting it, and all of a sudden it became like, like even news. I'm not sure if that helped or not. I mean, maybe it helped putting some pressure even, but in general, yeah, there is this problem of how to kind of identify, the real truth. And I think the real-time aspect of Twitter has put that pressure on, oh my God, it's on Twitter, and it's there, and so if I don't report it now, someone else is going to report it. I have to report it now, right now. So that kind of real-time kind of feed of Twitter has put that pressure on the media to act on it, but at the same time, the credibility so far is not being checked.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What we see in other revolutions is that once the ruler is overthrown, the main issue that brought people together is gone, and they tend to fall in amongst themselves. The divisions among the revolutionary activists. I'm wondering, with the various entrepreneurs that you know that are working on this in the activist movement, is there anyone working on how to keep this group of activists united now that Mubarak is gone? It's a very difficult process of negotiation going forward.
I think can I tag to that question? Maybe you can also touch on what the role of media will play in terms of now post-revolution.
So this question is a little bit above my pay grade. So I'll start with that. So I'll give you an example of something else that came out actually during the last 2 weeks that I think has implications going forward. Is everyone here familiar with the Open Mesh project? Do you guys know what that is? Okay, so this was essentially in response to the fact that a good friend of mine was actually involved with this. His name is Shervin Bishavar. But basically the idea is that when the government turned off access to the web, and actually mobile access for that matter too, there was this short-term problem of how do we communicate. So the idea behind a mesh network, it's essentially technology that allows you to create an ad hoc network by just connecting your existing devices with other people's devices directly. So instead of going up to the web and then connecting to you, it's just literally an ad hoc peer-to-peer connection. And if you get enough people in sort of a concentrated enough geographical density, you can actually recreate the internet effectively, at least between yourselves, right? So you can have a line of communication that can't be broken. So, these guys essentially said, all right, well, this is a problem. So they started the Open Mesh project, which was just a way to take mesh networking technology, open source. It's a nonprofit initiative, and make that kind of technology available to people on the ground, or anywhere for that matter, so that that kind of problem of connectivity doesn't disappear. So it's an example, I think, of how some of this stuff is going to continue to survive regardless of who the administration is or anywhere in the world, really. And it's sort of some of the redundancy and response to how regimes have responded in the course of events like this. I think it's one of the tools that might be certainly important going forward. But I think to your question about do people continue to collaborate and how that moves forward, I'm sure there are lots of people working on that right now. I don't know that I have any specific examples to talk about there.
So I think so far the revolution has been faceless, or at least it had a face, and the face was Khaled Said. And Khaled Said now has been resuscitated, so now there's no more, there's no more someone talking from beyond, more or less. I think now it's tricky to see how all the actors are going to put hand in hand. For example, Wael, who did the Facebook group, and others who did other groups, but Wael, who did his Facebook group, did not know the other activists. Because he was not it was not called an activist, he's just someone who started a Facebook group, and he used his skills to get that. And others, they didn't know that who he was until, they saw him and they met him a few weeks before it happened. So I think it's important to see, it's a diffuse leadership, if you want, but the thing is, so Wael, when we make the example of Wael, before yesterday, he was tweeting saying something like, "I'm lost. I'm not sure what we should do. We gained some political, we had some political gains. Maybe we should, relax or something." And some others were saying, "No, he had the backlash, saying, no, you just did your job, no, and don't worry about that, etc." So basically, I'm worried that I think the best outcome would be if those activists and those young people get together and still maintain the face of the young Egyptian as the revolution. I think I'm worried that that might be tricky a bit, especially that a lot of those activists, you have two kind of activists. You have the activists you have activists, and you have the new kind of people who like well others who were geeks and kind of found themselves there pure out of emotion. So a lot of these guys now are going to move out because they don't have political aspirations, or they maybe not politically savvy. So it's very interesting to see how that's going to transform, and if those are going to be the same glue that actually got everyone together now, if they're going to continue. I'm not sure, and it's a very tough question to answer, but I think the best thing that could happen on the ground is these guys get more in touch with each other and just sit down and agree that there are going to be, discrepancies, or not going to be fractions between them, at least on the activist group.
I have a point for you. We in America keep calling these people free agents, and you have a revolution virtually run by free agents. And it seems like we always talk about breaking these silos down, and I mean, other than the intrinsic silo that you had in government, you now have all of these free agents who have created this opening. And I think for us in the United States, it's going to be interesting to watch that, because we don't have a corollary to that. We even our, peacekeeping or, our activist groups, they're a silo. So if one of the person who did that first Facebook page, if he probably went up to an institution here and said, I'm going to do that, they would have said no. And I think it's going to be awesome for us to watch, especially those of us who like to be free agents, see how you deal with that. So I think it's awesome.
I think also Katherine touched on that by talking about the metadata and trying to figure out, to identify that trend before it actually happened. And I think it was obvious to many that were in touch that something big is going to happen, maybe not that big, but it was obvious that January 25 was going to be a historic demonstration. And I think a lot of people just missed out on that because they missed out on what's happening on the ground. There's institutions, there's government, but in between on the ground, what's happening, that's kind of the missing part. So I think, and we're seeing this kind of happen as well in other parts of the Middle East. Or trying to replicate that. It's going to be interesting to see how much successful it's going to be, or unsuccessful, depends on how you look at it. But in Egypt, for example, I think it's going to be a historical case study moving forward. Using purely Facebook and Twitter and YouTube to ignite it.
Got a question.
So I just wanted to comment on that question. I think it's an interesting notion, sort of a free radical. I kind of feel like the era that we're entering, everyone effectively is also going to be a free radical. And I think that's that's what's really scary about it. That's also what the opportunity, right? And I think in that kind of environment, the only thing that really resonates is authenticity. And of course, I think, again, the battle is going to be, how do you capture authenticity and sort of the hearts and minds of all the free radicals that are out there. I think that's an opportunity for certainly governments, and I know folks like Richard are working on some really interesting initiatives around this in the context of the U.S. government. I think we've actually done a pretty good job here of mobilizing the free radicals sort of to help get the word out about the stuff that we want to know about. Certainly mobilizing the vote is another example of. But I think you have to start to view everyone essentially as a free radical. You can't expect them to work in the confines of an institution or a silo. Even if they are in an institution, they also have this other free radical identity that exists in the consumer world. And I think we need to start speaking to people in their whole identities, not just the siloed ones.
It's fascinating.
I had one question. There was, in 2008, there was a Facebook group, the April 6th movement, that clearly petered out. So, it didn't succeed at the moment. Is the difference now between levels of technological literacy, or is it the underlying social conditions, or is it a combination? Probably, can you give any insight to?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The April 6th group had most of its group administrators. The police went on them before the actual demonstration went on the streets. And I think what happened with the other groups, they moved in much more calculated steps and they got people much more engaged, emotional, and much smarter about doing demonstrations. Like, for example, the one they did about wearing a black T-shirt. They also were very much, always peaceful, and they were always, for example, if you see some trash on the ground, we don't want to leave any trash on the ground. So I think the approach was different. April 6th was mostly approached from an activist perspective and a bit more maybe political. The newer groups were much more emotional, much more, people can relate much easier to someone who has been tortured and the picture were put online were really horrifying than with someone who's asking for demands from day one. And that was kind of, I think, the major difference. And then obviously what happened in Tunisia kind of gave it like the last boost, the espresso shot basically for Jan 25.
Yeah. So the one thing I would just add to that is I think table stakes for all of these things are connectivity to some extent. What's really interesting to me as I watch just the world over is the penetration of mobile phones. I mean, that is just sort of skyrocketing. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. I think people understand that utility, and my sense of it is that, once you start to have connectivity at that level, where regardless of sort of class, there's utility and there's access, I think it's really hard to turn off. And so my sense of it is that if you follow that trend line, I think it's already, in Egypt, I don't know what the connectivity numbers are, 30% internet access? What's a little bit less? But everyone has a mobile device, I suspect. Is that fair? And I suspect there's sort of similar dynamics at work everywhere else in the world. And I would say actually mobile penetration leads internet access, and in many cases in Africa, for instance, mobile internet access comes through a mobile phone, not through a desktop device. So I think all those seeds have been laid, and I think so for the next 10 years, certainly following those trend lines, my sense is that this is going to happen a lot more.
And actually, it's funny. I mean, I think even the simple point of some new features in Facebook also help virality grow as well. And then it's as simple as that. If we really want to get to it down, it's one of about reposting a message about taking your cell phone and making a video, which now is much cheaper than 08, and to mash it up and to share it back on Facebook. So a lot of those things also, I'm sure Saad said, as technology is exponentially growing, also the exponential power of individuals is growing.
Just wanted to touch on your comment that we're sort of all free radicals now in this sense, and you made the comment that there's really no leader in this, and I think Tunisia is maybe a similar situation. Is this, era of open communications one where everybody in essence become part of the leadership, and if so, what's the implications of civil society? I mean, you no longer have somebody to negotiate with if you wanted to come to an agreement at some level, right? You literally, everybody has a voice, and just thinking through that over time, what's the implication of that?
I'm not sure if I'm the best to answer that question. It's a bit more political for my taste, but I think technology is definitely going to help get people together more than differentiate them, more than create fraction. And I'm hoping that all the influencers, all the activists, and there's a huge list, and Saad's visualization can actually show that. I'm hoping that those will get much more together, because this is, and what happened in Tunis is slightly different than what's happening in Egypt. But at the same, I mean, the youth is emerging in Egypt as the winner, and as long as those demands are being met, as long as you empower them through technology, through education, through entrepreneurship, as long as you can keep on empowering those, as long as you keep on getting the geek, on letting the geeks being geeky in their own country with freedom. I think that's going to be the one thing we
That's a really good point, and the fact that it's incumbent on many of these societies to recognize the fact that that their young people really aren't going to tolerate. They need more political, economic, social opportunity to the future.
I mean, actually, going on point, it's interesting. I mean, many of those activists who were really big part of that, they publicly say we're not political. They publicly say when they ask about politics on TV interviews, they say, we don't know. Right. Don't answer that question, I don't know. All what I want is actually, I know I'm being stripped of my rights. I know that there's something that needs to be changed, and I'm trying to and I know that 80 other million people feel the same way, and I'm trying to just help them do that. So I think, I mean, maybe that's bad or good moving forward, but that's how what it took us so far.
Reality. So this is all the realm of speculation, I think, obviously. What it says to me, though, is that, one of the sort of realities of moving forward is just that borders matter a lot less, right? I mean, the fact is everyone is connected. I think a lot of the people in this room, as I mentioned, and I mean, I saw people crying outside in front of the TV when Mubarak stepped down here. It probably says something to how engaged people actually are. And so as I think about the future and what this means, I think it means that more causes will become global causes as opposed to regional or local causes. I still think there are always leaders that develop. I mean, in this case, we just had, in an ad hoc fashion, probably several new leaders develop in the context who no one knew before the events transpired, right? We didn't know Wild's name before the events transpired, but now everyone does. So I think there are essentially opportunities for new leaders to emerge and to do it in a very organic way. I think sort of democratic societies in general are just contingent on the fact of having mass participation. And all we're saying is mass participation happens a lot faster now than ever before.
Question. This morning I had asked about our government and cloud computing. And since you guys use social media and Google, which is basically all on the cloud, was there a worry from the people on the ground that their cloud was being infiltrated? I mean, did you see it? I mean, you have these Google documents, you're keeping track of these people. Did the Egyptian government or anybody try to go in and...
Yeah, it's obviously that was like a concern. And the other fun thing is, so the Alive in Egypt project was one of those projects that I think gave a voice and kind of translated a lot of this thing was happening on the ground with audio, which was very powerful, kind of a citizen journalism as well aspect to it. But at the same time, so the numbers that were given out, at some point, they were blocked. So no one from Egypt could call in on those numbers. And as soon as those got blocked, we got people telling us that. Then all very pro-Mubarak calls started coming in, and very also weird calls started coming in. So and when that happened, started happening, then we got new numbers out. And when we got the new numbers out, we started actually sending them in the back channels to people saying in DMs, direct message on Twitter, not to the public, saying you can go and share that. Now, obviously, there was lots of people were scared also all the time that they would, not necessarily from a cloud perspective, but just from a very simple perspective of their identity being revealed. Like the Facebook group administrators were always anonymous. At some point in time, there was a bug in Facebook for just a few hours that revealed the identity of and the email address of the administrator. And I remember because Wael just freaked out and called me, and we were trying to reach out to Facebook to try to fix that very quickly. And even at some point, the group was shut down because the people behind it are anonymous, and they don't allow that. So also they had like to kind of make an appeal and say, no, it's actually we're true, we're real, but we can't actually reveal our identity. So I think people were always worried about identity. And the one interesting example is a Twitter guy who goes by the name Sand Monkey. And he never had his Twitter, his real identity revealed until he was detained and found. So obviously, his identity has been compromised. Then when he was released, then he revealed his name. So I think a lot of people in the past few weeks were worried before that, not in the past few weeks. In the past few weeks, everything was public. And you get detained, they would tweet about that. And you would tweet about that, everyone would get crazy about that. And then people would try and come in and help. So I think it was circumventing the power structure very well. Open technology was helping circumventing the power structures.
Well, I'd be remiss if I know you're talking about the power of mobile phones as well, and even though Egypt is obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but I wonder if you have any thoughts, going back to another crisis a little over a year ago in Haiti, and one thing that Richard and I were talking about before, which was the 4636 mission, and just what's your idea about open media and how it can be used effectively across a wide variety. I mean, there's one thing that, there's the obvious benefit to this in opening up societies like Egypt's, but, in responding to natural disasters and whatnot.
Right.
If you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think what was interesting very much in it was the Ushahidi platform, which is an open platform that allows people to basically indicate that there's a problem or there's an issue based on location through cell phones.
Right.
And that was very much well used in Haiti, also very much used in other places. I mean, not that we're picking on Egypt, but it was also used in Egypt before then to kind of, in a map called Harass Map, for harassment, sexual harassment. So, people would tweet or would send a message on Ushahidi saying, at this point, at this location in Cairo, there was such and such event, and people would get. It was even used in Lebanon during the elections. It was used in Haiti also. So I think open platforms. If you let your users innovate on your behalf, you get to a much higher, a much more accelerated pace of innovation.
Yeah.
So this is why open mentality, open platform has helped a lot. And sometimes in the case of Haiti, sometimes in the case of Egypt for a revolution.
And it seems as though whenever whether it's a natural disaster like Haiti or this, social unrest that happens in Egypt and Tunisia, it drives the technology forward, by leaps and bounds, just the crisis itself.
I think you see actually entirely new applications of technology too. So, like in the case of Haiti, I think the big challenge on the ground was identifying where people were hurt and how to get to them quickly. So Ushahidi was certainly a big part of it. I'm an advisor to a company called SamaSource, which is this is a nonprofit. It's and what they do is, in general, it sort of leverages the crowd. So it's about. Is anyone here familiar with Mechanical Turk? Do you guys know what that is? Okay, so I think I see a lot of heads nodding. For those of you who aren't, the idea is just micro tasks, things that I would actually pay someone 3 cents to do, maybe to look at my listing or translate something for me, these 3 words for me in a different language. So what SamaSource does is it takes those kinds of tasks and actually has them fulfilled by people overseas, typically in places that, where that wage actually means something. So it's usually pretty troubled or, places where there's not a lot of other economic opportunity. And so they were involved in a heavy way with regards to the Haiti initiatives on all those fronts, on leveraging essentially their mobile fulfillers of this work to be translating, to be identifying locations of people that was then being essentially used to, for the relief effort. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that comes out of these things. Again, what's exciting to me is, as a sort of a for-profit investor, is it happens so quickly and so organically and so cheaply that it's just amazing to watch when you have motivated people. Great things happen, and that's the opportunity, I think, for both on the nonprofit side as well as on the for-profit side in terms of the pace of innovation.
Sure, go ahead.
Could I pick up on that last comment? I've been interested for a while in the interface between that inexpensive, cheap, not-for-profit and the big business. Similar kind of thing we're seeing in government. Institutions are often slower, they're conservative, they're worried about what might happen, and they can't see the future. Do you see sort of a way forward there? I mean, there's obviously huge resources that might be brought to bear. Would, for example, and I've heard this said about new ventures, that sometimes too much money too early is really bad. What sort of resources should be applied to these things?
It's usually just enough for ramen noodles. I think that point is sort of a big question. The way I think the industry in general has been responding to it is just that, you're right, bigger institutions have a lot of reasons why they can't move as fast, many of them very real. I think what's happening in the startup world certainly is just bigger institutions are looking at startups as outsourced R&D. That's effectively the role they play. So you find a team of people who's really nimble, who's very cheap to get started, who makes some innovation. And then you have companies like Google and AOL and other folks who are buying these guys, essentially just for, not even for the technology, just for access to those research teams, right? And there's almost internal prices that they put on how much they're willing to pay for that person. And that's why you have all these acquisitions that happen sort of in the $5 to $15 million kind of acquisitions that are exactly that. It's just, well, for whatever reason, we couldn't get it to work internally because it was really hard, but these three guys or three girls, here or internationally said, we got it to work, and you're essentially buying that expertise.
So to loop that back, there's been experience developed in the private sector with that kind of pricing. What about what we have spent most of this session talking about, that organizing political influence, the grouping together of people who care, have talent, have energy, but do you see any mechanisms for organizing and bringing kind of order out of these movements?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question. I think there's obviously opportunity. There's some interesting initiatives that I've seen here with regards to open data. So, for instance, I know Anish and other people have talked about just the U.S. essentially taking a lot of the data they have about census-related stuff, labor-related stuff, health-related stuff, and saying, here it is. You figure out what to do with it. And I think that's probably a great way to to serve as a bridge between sort of the institutional side of this as well as sort of the entrepreneurial side of this. And I think you need more initiatives like that. But I suspect they're about essentially building bridges to these innovators as opposed to trying to bring that innovation and recreate it in-house. It seems to be, for whatever reason, there's a lot of institutional inertia, and I can't quite put my finger on why. I have some thoughts, but so I think the better way to do it is don't mess with the stuff that's working and try to find a bridge to it.
I think look at Twitter, for example. It's one good example of how they're outsourcing innovation, how they're really relying on end-user innovation. End-user innovation is kind of, you come up with a toaster and someone else takes it and makes the microwave. And that's what's happening kind of with Twitter. Everyone's taking the stream, and they're not even focusing on anything else but whatever they know they are good at. And everyone else is innovating on their behalf. You see, what Saad showed us is amazing, and then this kind of information that you can get because Twitter is open is amazing. And I'm sure there's lots of data geeks that would love to get their hands on something else, that you can provide, that they can work something around and be innovative about it.
Hi, we have a question from our Ustream audience. This is from Jay Cravens. Earlier you did discuss verifying information that came in through social media, but have you found that misinformation being rapidly sent by social media is a big problem, and how do you actually go about dealing with that? How do you go about dealing with the rumors and the myths that come up?
Well, fortunately, it was not a huge problem because the information that was released was not that harmful. But the thing is, the media, I think on Twitter, people still have they still kind of don't trust it yet. Each person does his own credibility check on their own usually. But then when it goes and it gets covered by the media, then by mainstream media like Arabi and Al Jazeera, when they covered, for example, that well was released and was actually a goalkeeper being cheered by the crowd, then this is when it becomes a bit more tricky. And I'm not sure. I mean, there's lots of products that are trying to figure out credibility and try to assign an influence number, try to assign all of that. But I think in a moment of panic, in a moment of Twitter panic, everyone starts retweeting and talk about that. And I remember well because I was really annoyed, and everyone was asking me, because they know I'm from the well, everyone was asking me this question. I was saying, please just don't retweet. And it's very easy to think that you're part of a movement by clicking a retweet button. And that's what actually was caused a lot with it as well. These people click a retweet button, yes, I'm good, I did my job today, I feel good, and I'm gonna rest for the day and keep on retweeting. So that's something that was annoying. I'm not sure how we can go work around it, but I'm sure that technology, with the help of technology, we will be able to kind of assign credibility to actually virtual sources.
So I think the first thing you do in that scenario is you say sorry, and you actually report the right information, right? And that's kind of what the media outlets have been doing, sort of, oops, my bad, actually Mubarak isn't stepping down, and then, of course, now he is stepping down. That's step one, but I think, to Habib's point, technology has a big role to play in this. It just turns out it's really hard to do, right? It's really hard to provide that level of QA on top, essentially an extra level of curation. But there are people who are working on this. So there's entire systems that are now being placed, statistical systems, to essentially serve as QA for work that you're doing. And this could be relevant if you're translating Arabic to English. Well, if I don't speak Arabic, how do I know that it's actually a good translation or not? And so, people build statistical systems to essentially take that same piece of information, farm it out to multiple people to see, do most people seem to coalesce around one answer? If so, they seem to be credible. So the next time when we send them another piece of work, chances are we'll trust them more than the guy who did it wrong the first time. So, this is, I think, all the infrastructure that's being built out. Those are actually exactly the kinds of technology that I've been investing in. And that's kind of what's exciting, because it's actually really hard to do. But I think what we're pointing out here is that there is a big problem associated with it, which is probably why it's going to be, I think, very useful and very valuable moving forward.
Any other questions on our live feed? So if you guys have any comments, I'm a bit talked out, but
No, I think basically just my own comment is, again, I'm going back to what I said earlier. I mean, social media has lowered the cost of innovation, lowered the cost of evolution, and I think that's going to give power to a lot of new individuals. And talking back to the Middle East, don't forget the Middle East is 70% under the age of 30. Very passionate, very tech savvy, that we're seeing it happen in front of our eyes. So I don't underestimate their willingness for freedom and their willingness to actually take action. And B, look at what they've done so far. I think as well also said that Revolution 2.0, not sure if I totally agree with that, but there's definitely some truth to it. And I think embrace technology and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty.
thanks.
Yeah, I would just say expertise in this world is so federated because it is consumer technology that everyone has their own personal relationship with. I frankly think everyone else in this room has as much an opportunity to be an expert as anybody up here on this panel, or anybody for that matter. And so, I kind of push it back to you. I'd be interested in hearing if anyone else has thoughts about how they've been involved, what they've seen. Frankly, I'd love to hear it, whether it's in this room or outside afterwards, but or certainly for the live streaming people as well. I think my sense is the reason people are passionate about this topic is because they're attached to this material and attached to what's going on. And I bet we all have anecdotes that we'd love to share.
Anybody want to chime in or?
One last thing.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's already now kind of coming out across Twitter that Mubarak may be out, but the status quo is in. What do you feel about that? Do you think the status quo is in, or are they gone as well?
I think, and again, this is talking from a technology person that's looking at his Twitter feed and hearing his friends and chatting with his friends on the ground. I think that status quo has been challenged, and I think the power, at least the perception of people, is the power is now back to the people, the power is back to the youth. So that's something that has been kind of a flag that has been put down today, a few hours ago.
I'm just really curious what happens in other parts of the world. Really curious. I certainly am not I don't feel that I have enough expertise to talk about a lot of these issues, but I have a sense that there are a lot of leaders in a lot of different places, not just the Middle East, who are looking at this and saying, what does this mean for me?
Yeah. Well, this has been tremendously eye-opening for me, and I think that obviously all the themes that you guys hit on are obviously being played out on the streets of Cairo today, and it's incredibly compelling. I think we here at the State Department are also learning to understand and to use this new technologies. I know my boss, PJ Crowley, is an avid tweeter. And it's been effective. It's a really effective. I've seen it. I know that as well. That was my second thing I was going to mention. And you know what? But I can see that how it's a tremendously effective way to just convey, short bursts of information and get a story out there and So it's interesting to me to see how, you can use this new medium, this new technology to influence kind of traditional media, because it's certainly, our quote-unquote bullpen, which is like the Wires, AP, and all the brick and mortar media, now have to follow, all these Twitter feeds and keep abreast of it, because it's now shaping the news cycle. And I mean, in some ways it's phenomenal. In some ways it just adds another level to this kind of incessant thirst for information and 24/7 and ratchets it up again. But it's certainly it's exhilarating. So anyway, I appreciate your time and your insights today. Thank you very much.